The wind that crossed the northern grasslands of Lothal arrived like a long-held breath finally released, rippling the tawny stalks so that they lay flat and then rose again with a whispering hush that sounded, to Ahsoka Tano, like the edge of a memory. She stood where the earth swelled into a modest rise, her cloak lifting, the smell of dust and sun-warmed seed pods settling into her lungs. The sky hung in a hard, brilliant hue that old masters might have called temple blue, and the shadows under the drifting clouds were shaped oddly by the geometry of ruins that had been swallowed and disgorged by time. In the near distance, a loth cat lifted its head from a patch of creeping time and blinked its wide marbled eyes with the unhurried certainty of a native soul. Life went on with or without the galaxy's empires. The grass had learned to bend and not break. She had walked for hours, because walking mattered. In the ship she could have crossed these miles in a handful of seconds, skimming over fields and low canyons like a stone skipping water, but the Force clung tighter to the ground than to the sky. It told slow truths to those who took the trouble to move like a pilgrim and breathe like one too. Each step let her listen, and each listening showed her how the land had kept its counsel. First through occupation, then through hunger, then through the night where the stars themselves seemed to wait before they allowed dawn to come. That patience had taught her a long time ago, on worlds no longer safe to name, that a guardian was not only a blade or a shield. A guardian was a presence that could be relied upon to stay. The rise leveled into a basin circled by stones that had once been called something and were now simply themselves again. In the far north a flash of white moved like a low cloud. A loth wolf, stern and distant on the ridge, head lifted as if scenting thoughts. Even that far away she felt the tonality of its attention. Not judgment. Recognition. There was a moment when their gazes met across the grass ocean. The wolf gave the barest inclination of its head, and then vanished, as if the rumor of its body had dissolved into wind. She felt a smile find her mouth, private and grateful, the way one smiles to an elder who has stopped pretending not to care. At the center of the basin, the ground bore the faintest blocky pattern, as if someone had pressed a grid into wet clay and then withdrawn it delicately. And beneath those lines, the memory of the temple shivered like heat, mirage. It had not been visible for years. The Empire had done what it always did when faced with a truth it could not command. It tried to unmake the evidence. But Lothal was not a world that yielded easily. It was a world that stored. The temple had learned to be more than its stones. Ahsoka stood and breathed, and let the air line up her bones, and then she knelt, placing her palm on the warm earth. She did not need to ask permission. The land had already asked her, and she had already answered. Even so, she waited. The waiting mattered too. She listened until the breath that flowed through her senses no longer felt like her breath alone. The grid under her fingers softened, as if an invisible frost were thawing. The Force here did not rise like a wave. It seeped, like light through woven fabric, patient and even. Ahsoka let her mind open, and the sensation of doors easing on ancient hinges rippled through her. When the first line of stone appeared, it did so without drama, the way a thought arrives just when one admits it. The square outlines clarified, dust falling away in a curtain so gentle a moth might have mistaken it for rain. A central path revealed itself a finger-width at a time, and then it broadened, and the way in lay before her, matte and stubborn and true. She rose. She touched the hilt of one lightsaber, not to draw it, but to remind it and herself that some thresholds deserve to be crossed without a weapon in hand. Then, unarmed in the ways that frightened fools, and armed in the ways that frightened monsters, inside the first chamber, the temperature fell like a hand soothing a fever. The air smelled of stone and old pollen, with a mineral purity that made the back of her tongue ache. The light was not light. It was the suspension of shadow that occurs when darkness chooses to let you see. Ahsoka had been here before only in echoes. Once the boy Ezra had come running through a place that was not a place at all, and plucked her like a bead from the string of time. She remembered the hum of that far corridor the way a sailor remembers green water under moonlight. How it looks when the sea remembers a sun that has not yet risen. That corridor had not belonged to this chamber. It belonged and did not belong, the way a face can be recognizable in profiles separated by several years. She stood and waited to see which of its moods the temple would offer, and whether it wanted her to be an old visitor or a new witness. Tiny things moved in the seams of stone. She crouched and found a brown loth spider no bigger than the nail of her thumb, its delicate legs testing the air. It paused on her skin, then went on, as if conceding jurisdiction. The force moved through small lives too, and sometimes more clearly. She saw in the spider a pattern as complicated as a star map and smiled again, because one of her oldest loves was the way the same thought could appear in the architecture of a building and the trajectory of a leaf. She did not call out. Names had power and silence had more. The temple taught by arranging circumstance until a student's own movement completed a shape. She took 3 paces toward the far arch, and as she did, the floor rippled. For a heartbeat she thought of water. Then she understood. The stones shifted not by sliding but by exchanging places with their siblings in other memories of the temple, until the central corridor had aligned with a corridor that was not entirely here. The arch deepened into night. She felt a pressure in her chest that was not fear. It was the respect one pays a teacher who has lived long enough to be wrong and right many times, without losing patience. "Thank you," she said, because that, too, mattered, and crossed. There are threshold spaces in the galaxy where the force is so condensed that scale becomes a courtesy word. Something polite to use while acknowledging one has no real idea which direction is larger. Ahsoka stepped into such a space now. Her feet met no surface, and yet they had purchase. Around her, blackness pricked with distant points created not a sky but a field, as if all possible nights had been laid gently on top of one another, until their constellations became a palimpsest. Pathways arced and intersected in faint lines of ink that glowed when attention rolled over them. Had she been a different kind of person, or had anyone stood beside her who had not already been once saved from drowning by this strange ocean, it might have felt like an avalanche of miracles. To Ahsoka, it felt like returning to an honest agreement. Sound works differently here. At first it is too honest, and then it becomes exact. A sigh that might have been a wind through the Lothal grass translated here into a far-born phrase that she did not strain to hear. "You came," it said without words. "You came, and you did not come to take." Ahsoka felt the moisture at the corners of her eyes, as if the thinness of this place had made every truth sharper. She tipped her chin in acknowledgement. She had come to watch the doors, not to open them. On one of the faint arcs that crossed her path like a baton, a light brightened. It was not white, but a color that she had never seen, except exactly here. It made a sound that was almost a bell, and almost a footstep in snow. Embedded in that light, like a moth in clear amber, was a window into a moment. A boy's hands reaching, his eyes wide with awe and terror, and a hand grabbing his sleeve to stop him from stepping too close to a memory of flames. Ezra. She had loved him without needing the word. She felt the old ache. The past did not apologize for being past. It simply kept breathing. Her muscles shifted as if to go to him, instinct as steady as the urge to steady a falling cup. She made herself still. On Lothal, the wind does not hurry, and here she must learn to borrow that. The guardianship she had taken up the day she let herself live, after Malachor, had not been a vow to fix. It had been a vow to honor what the Force wanted to be without her interference. She could warn. She could bar. She could maybe, if asked in the proper manner by those who risked something true, show the way to a safer edge. She could not decide that the sea needed her thumb pressed against it to lie still. Other lights murmured. One touched her shoulder like the weight of a cloak, and then moved away with the tact of an old friend. For a breath she thought she heard the timbre of a voice she had always loved, a laugh that carried through a barracks like early morning. Anakin's shadow, not the monstrous burn of the man who had gone into the mask, but the impatient warmth of the teacher who had pushed and teased and taught her the names of difficult maneuvers, as if he were naming stars. She let the sound be what it was, Not a promise, not a wound. A fact. Another light slid past, and now the texture of it was deeper, older, a resonance that had always seemed to come not from a throat, but from some room behind the heart. Master Yoda, perhaps. Air. From much further, a heat that was all compassion sharpened into purpose. That unmistakable firmness she had first learned about as a youngling. If she had said the name out loud, Qui-Gon, it would have made the moment brittle. So she kept it within her. Each tone bowed without touching. She bowed back. When she turned from the windows, she found that the pathway beneath her feet had arranged itself to lead to a particular node. She could decline. The Force did not summon here without consent. It presented a choreography, and waited to see if the dancer would step in. Ahsoka walked where it wished. When she reached the node, the space coalesced into a circle, the size of a modest hearth. In its center, a shape that was not a chair, and not a dais, took on the suggestion of both. She seated herself on the suggestion, and that is how it accepted her, because what a guardian sits on is not a throne, but an understanding. The Lothwolf's attention returned, closer now. Not with any animal presence, but with the particular austerity the wolves wore when they spoke for the planet. The field dimmed around the edges of her perception. That dimness carried a message, and for a little while the message unfolded in images rather than sentences. She saw raiders on battered speeders patrolling the next season roads like locusts who had learned to drive. She saw a new Republic scout ship on a vector toward Lothal, its pilot sincere and ambitious in equal measure, with a scientist in the second seat whose curiosity smelled a little like hunger. She saw the stone basin under stars, so clean, she felt the corners of her mouth ache, and in that basin, a child with a handmade charm woven of grass and beads, standing with a stubborn tilt, asking questions aloud to no one, because she had not yet met anyone who gave her good answers. When the sequence ended, the space resumed its neutrally attentive posture. Ahsoka let her breath move through her slowly enough to make time feel like a physical thing. She realized that the temple was saying, "You will be asked to let us alone and to open us up. You will be asked by well-meaning people, and by people who consider their meaning the only one. You will be asked by a child who is neither naive nor cynical, and whose asking will make you want to show her everything. You will need to decide 1,000 times how to say no, and how to say not yet, and how to say come with me this far, and stop." She stood. The nodes softened beneath her like powder snow returning to frost. As she turned to leave, the arcs brightened in salutation. She did not mistake it for celebration. It was merely acknowledgement. The way a forest nods to someone who knows where to step. In the arch of stone on the other side of the threshold, she paused long enough to place her palm against rock, the way you touch the shoulder of a comrade who is about to take the first watch. Then she went out into the chamber, and then into the light, where the day had already moved along without her. That was right. She preferred to be someone who adapted to the day, not someone who expected it to adapt to her. She made her camp not far from the ring of stones. The dome she raised was a canvas of warm-tinted fabric, strung between 3 adjustable staves, with lines anchored to nails. She tapped into the soil with the heel of her hand. Inside, the bedroll unrolled with a sound like a breath being uncrumpled. She set a kettle on a small heat coil and brewed tea that smelled of bark and cinnamon. The first sip carried its way down through the drier layers of her body until it found a root and watered it. The Lothcat from earlier made a disreputable silhouette against the dome wall, and then, after some negotiations that consisted mainly of ignoring each other, took up residence on the little mat by the entrance. The day wrote itself in small errands. A stone cleared here, a string adjusted there. She showed herself to the place as a person more than as a story. Toward evening a figure arrived from the east along the path, less a path than a habitual line of least resistance. The wind brought the clinking note of something metal in a pocket before it brought the human smell. A farmer, she guessed, from the long gait and the practical clothing. When the person drew close enough, Ahsoka saw she was mistaken by a degree. Not a farmer, not primarily. A woman in late middle age, with the bearing of someone who had once delivered orders and learned, afterward, to deliver wheat. She carried a lamp in her left hand and wore a hat whose brim had been patched and repatched until it had become a statement against waste. Her eyes had the clarity that came from grief lived with openly. "Evening," the woman said, stopping at a respectful distance from the ring of stones and making a point of glancing at the temple, only the way one glances at a grave. As a place for prayer, not a place for sightseeing. "You're new." Ahsoka nodded. "I'm old in other places. New here." The woman tipped her chin. That kind of answer keeps people from asking the wrong questions. "Name's Tima. My aunt kept watch here once, with others. When the Empire was thick, and the wolves were angrier than they look now. We weren't important enough to make the Empire notice us. That was our slice of luck." "I could use the names of those who kept watch," Ahsoka said. "Luck too." Tima smiled with half her mouth and let her gaze stray to the Lothcat, who rolled over on the mat as if demonstrating a philosophical point. "I'll make you a list. We keep an old one at the cooperative. I brought you a lamp. Nights are cold. Folks who camp without one are either very sure of their nights or very foolish." She held out the lamp. "Thank you." Ahsoka took the gift in both hands, weight and warmth, and someone's thought made physical. "I can pay." "You can pay by keeping bad kinds of noise down. I hear the wrong sort have been sniffing around in town. Not local wrong. Shipped in wrong. Shrapnel outfits. The ones who come looking for relics they can sell and bring weapons to make sure their curiosity doesn't go unanswered. We handle most trouble ourselves. Better when trouble looks up. Better when trouble looks expected." Ahsoka studied Tima's hat because some conversations deserved a posture of humility. "I'll be here," she said simply. "And I won't be only here. If I go, I'll leave a way for you to reach me faster than a runner." "Nendatao." Tima nodded again. Satisfied. "Good. If you need bread or a message sent, the cooperative is down at the old turban yard, South Road. Ask for me or Horan. Bring the cat and we'll all be at your mercy." She touched 2 fingers to the brim of her hat, in a gesture that might have once been military, and now was simply her own. Then turned and left, her lamp bobbing, a small star recruited by evening. Ahsoka watched the line of her retreat until it was folded by the tall grass. The wind moved in a new tenor, cooler now, attentive in the precise way that becomes silence. She lit the lamp and placed it beside the entrance to the dome, where its glow painted a shallow crescent on the ground. The cat made a pleased noise that could have been territorial satisfaction, or the deep canine mystery that occasionally overtook Lothcats and made them behave as if they were playing at being something larger. Above, the first stars found their stations, and for a moment she saw the corridor again as a ghostly overlay. She wondered sometimes whether the temple saw the night sky and thought fondly of its own map. Later, as she settled into the bedroll, she took up the small carved disc she wore on a cord at her throat. The Morai had once watched her with a regard that felt like being corrected gently by a grammar one did not yet know. The disc bore a suggestion of the wings, a suggestion of the eye. She held it between her palms and let the force cinch her attention into a single thread that could run all the way to the morning. Sleep was possible when one trusted that the part of her that did not sleep would continue the watch. 3 nights passed like that, each with its own texture. One windy and conversational, one so still it felt like listening to a held note, one in which a low fog lapped at the ring of stones and turned the lamp's halo into a small private world. On the 4th morning, a disturbance arrived. A speeder's note, wrong for this place, not because it was inherently noisy, but because it carried impatience like an afterburner. Ahsoka stood from where she had been kneeling by a scrim of lichen, testing its softness. The speeder came over the low rise and halted with an unnecessary flourish that sprayed dust and scattered the nearby Lothbirds. 2 riders, young enough to believe their bluff needed to be loud. Breath-hungry in both of them, she noted, but the hunger had different flavors. The driver's hunger was for coin and for the feeling of doing something that would make him less embarrassed when people asked him what he was for. The second rider's hunger was curiosity without discipline. He stared at the ring of stones as if measuring them for a fit. "This is a protected site," Ahsoka said before they could speak. Her tone was unadorned iron. "Turn around. Go back to town. Have breakfast. Find a better day for yourselves." The driver's grin was all teeth. "Old shrine," he said. "Old permission slips. We're contractors for a research outfit out of the sector capital. We got a right to take a look." "You have a right to leave without being laughed at," Ahsoka replied. "Those are rare." The second rider swung one leg over the saddle and slid down. The driver hissed something sharp under his breath, but the second rider had fixed on the faint grid under the dust with the focus of someone who had always suspected that the universe was hiding a trick from him, and had just found the edge of the deck. He crouched, reached toward the ground, paused, too late, and looked up at Ahsoka as if asking permission after the touch had already been decided. "No," Ahsoka said. Just the one syllable, and in it, a pressure applied not to his body, but to the impulse that had been about to nudge his fingers forward. The force was not a baton to be swung at a person, but a pair of hands placed gently around a mistake. He blinked, and she saw him feel, as anyone could feel, if he paid attention, the thinness in the air above the grid. The driver scowled and reached for the bit of metal mounted under the handlebars of the speeder. That ugly pewter promise people liked to point at what they did not understand. Ahsoka stepped, and the step was something she had not needed for a long time. So exact it made the dust hesitate in the air, the way a note hesitates before completing a chord. By the time her foot settled, the weapon had come loose by its own lack of confidence and fallen into the dust. "Don't," she said to the driver. The second rider rose slowly, his eyes now on her instead of the ground. He was bright. That was the trouble. Bright, and no one had given him a philosophy to wear like a fall harness, so that his curiosity would not become a plummet. "What is it?" he asked, voice quiet, not defiant, imploring. "What's under the ground?" "The part of you that knows how to ask better questions," she said. "Go and learn their names. Come back when you know one or two, and we'll see if they are the kind that let you stand closer." Then shall. He absorbed that. The driver had gone from bravado to calculation. Was she a Jedi? Could the New Republic be made to care about their contract? Was there another site to plunder that would be less expensive? At last, with the mulish reluctance of a child who had never been allowed to keep his dignity intact when he was wrong, he grunted and kicked dust at the ground in a gesture both rude and ritual. "Fine," he said. "Plenty of old stones out there. Keep your pile." "Thank you," Ahsoka said, "for leaving before you did something that would make you wake at night for a year." She held the driver's gaze until some private bravado bent, battered by the peculiar humiliation of being forgiven before one had even committed a sin. He looked away first. They mounted. The speeder turned. Its engine note receded, leaving behind a smell like cheap greenhouse solvent. The second rider turned his head for a last look. She gave him a small nod that meant two different things and trusted he might feel both. Then they were gone, and the Lothbirds came back to their grass rattle, and the cat made a sound like an insult delivered in its own language. That evening, she walked the edge of the basin and let her fingers brush the tops of the tall grass, like a woman courting a field she wished to harvest without cutting. The stars gestured for her attention. She followed that invitation into the corridor again, and this time, when the arcs lit, they did not offer a memory or a warning. They offered a question shaped like a crossroads. Two faint paths, one toward a window where she saw Sabine Wren's silhouette against a ship's hatch, back straight, jaw set, art-bright hair hidden under a traveling scarf, and the other toward a smaller glow, in which a child with a grass charm around her wrist stood in a classroom drawing triangles in the air and watching them turn into kites. She felt then the precise weight of what it would mean to be a guardian. Guardianship did not mean solitude. It meant the exactness of choice. She could walk after Sabine now, lend that quest her gravity, help shoulder the ache that did not lessen with time. Or she could choose to remain, to be the person a world needed, to be the one who said not yet, and no, and yes like a metronome that kept time for a chorus. She saw that each path was not an always. She could go and return. She could stay and still send help. The Force did not pin her, but it did ask for the kind of commitment that made returning meaningful and leaving honest. Ahsoka lifted her hands and let them fall in the ancient's gesture of balance. Palms open, wrists meeting, then separating. "I will be here," she said to the question, which is also the way one answers children and storms. "I will be here when the ones who need me come. I will be here when those who should not enter think about coming. I will be here when the wolves are elsewhere. And when I am not here, I will be under the same sky that is inside you, and I will come back." Then, the corridor shifted around her with the contentment of a machine that has synchronized after a series of careful adjustments. The arcs dimmed to their resting glow. A far light rippled. It might have been Ezra again, or someone else entirely, because time here wore masks not to deceive, but to direct attention to the correct layer of truth. Ahsoka lowered her head. When she left, the temple sealed the seam with the modest grace of a seamstress finishing a hem. The wind outside caught at the edge of her cloak, and then let it go, as if greeting and farewell were the same gesture at different distances. In the following days, she made small changes that only people who lived with a place notice. She sunk a rain catch off the lee of the dome, and lined it with smooth stones, so the Lothbirds could drink. She stacked flat rocks into a waist-high wall that suggested a boundary without threatening one, and left gaps where the paths, animal and human, had declared themselves. She set a narrow bench near the ring of stones, not facing the temple, but facing the horizon, so that anyone who came to pray would be tempted to remember they were part of a landscape and not apart from it. At the cooperative she wrote names. The names made their own music when read aloud, and each carried a brief story. The woman who had hidden a transmitter in a flour sack and listened under her bed to Hera Syndulla's voice. The boy who had carried messages on a bicycle with a squeaky wheel and had never learned to fix it because his aunt said she could locate him anywhere by the sound. The old man who had whispered to the wolves and had taught them that whispering was an art. She copied the list and placed the copy in a tin box beneath the bench. On the 7th day, a child arrived. She came without a speeder or an adult or fear. Her hair was in 2 long plaits tied with blue thread. The charm around her wrist was woven grass and beads. Small, mismatched, brave. She stopped at the edge of the stones and planted her feet, and looked at Ahsoka with the kind of unembarrassed concentration that made it impossible to pretend you did not see the invisible lines that connected living beings. "Are you the person who says you can't go in?" the child asked. "Because Aunt Tima says there's a person like that now, and we should be glad." Ahsoka nodded. "I'm the person who says not yet." "Sometimes I say yes. More often I say wait." The child considered this, waiting and unweighting her feet until she had decided which leg was the one to lean on. "People don't like waiting," she announced. "They like being first even when it's not a race." "Do you like waiting?" Ahsoka asked. "I like it when it's a secret, and I'm the only one who knows I'm going to get something." The child's eyes brightened. "I have a question. If the temple is a door, where is the room?" Ahsoka felt the corridor stir in amusement. "That's a good question," she said. "Do you know the word corridor?" The child made a seesaw motion with her hand. "My teacher says it's the place in school where you get in trouble for running, but sometimes you run anyway." "It's a place that connects rooms," Ahsoka said. "Sometimes the connecting is the important part. Sometimes the rooms are only excuses for corridors to exist. If you had a corridor that could connect any rooms at all, would you trust everyone to run down it whenever they like?" The child wrinkled her nose in a grimace of fair-minded reluctance. "No," she admitted, "because then Fyra would push me, and I would push her back, and then we would both be in trouble because we can't share a corridor without making it a race." "Exactly," Ahsoka said. "So someone stands in the corridor and says walk, and sometimes says wait, and sometimes says this door is not for you yet. Not because you'll never grow big enough, but because you will make a better choice later than you would now." The child inspected her charm and twisted it around her wrist with the solemn attention of someone tuning an instrument. "Who tells the person in the corridor what to say?" "The corridor," Ahsoka said, which made the child laugh, which made the day feel more complete. "And the person, because her job is to listen. And the wolves, and the wind. And sometimes an old voice you don't know the name of until later." The child's eyes went wide. Like a story. Are you going to be here always? I'm going to be here enough, Ahsoka said. When you come back in a year, I'll be here. If you come back in 10, I'll be here, or someone will be who listens the way I do. Then? The child looked at the bench and then beyond it to the horizon. Then back at Ahsoka, as if she had passed a test she had not known had been set. I'm going to draw your bench in my book, she said, so that I practice facing the right direction. Then, with a small decisive nod that told Ahsoka this child had come into the world with a compass, and would keep it whether or not anyone pointed out north to her, the girl turned and went, walking in a line that respected both the Lothbird's nests and the place where the grass grew thinner because of the old stone under it. The lamp burned that night with a steadier flame, as if it too had decided someone was watching who could be relied upon. Ahsoka sat and let her bones be taught by the posture of stillness. In the near distance, a catenated sequence of lights marked a train carrying grain. She thought of Coruscant, the cold burnish of its towers, the way light there behaves as if it is being watched by a jury, and felt no pull toward it. It had things to teach, and she had learned them. Here, the lesson ran like water under stone, shaping slowly, making canyons from patience. Toward midnight, she felt the temple tense, not with fear, with readiness. She rose, her sabers still at her belt, but her hands empty. At the edge of the ring of stones she stopped and waited. The night parted in its fabric so that a thread could pass through. Sound came first, the very particular soft metal ring of someone who has learned to carry their armor in a way that tells a story. Then a voice, low and careful. If I'm interrupting a prayer, tell me to take off my boots and go away. Ahsoka smiled in the dark. Hera, she said, and Hera Syndulla stepped from the night like a friend stepping from another room in a familiar house. They embraced in the way of old comrades, where part of you never thinks you deserve this much grace, and the other part calculates, with profound relief, that you have been allowed to keep this person alive long enough to hold them again. Hera's leku twitched with fatigue. They told me you were here, and then they told me I should make an appointment. I told them I have one of those with the universe every day, and I can't keep them all. I brought you dried apricots. Do guardians eat dried apricots, or is that against a rule? I don't know yet. Then sigh. Ahsoka took the parcel and inhaled the dense sugar with a hunger that was not only physical. Guardians keep their strength up when good people bring them fruit, she said. What do you need? Hera tilted her head toward the basin. What we all need. Safety, without suffocation. Knowledge that doesn't come with a bill of sale. Lines that look like lines before people cross them, so they cannot pretend they didn't know. There's talk of a formal survey team, with permits, which means with men who will argue with you about words while their assistants do damage. I can stall. But stalling is a kind of lying. I'd rather tell them the truth, that there's a guardian and the guardian says no, and if they argue with you, they'll end up arguing with the kind of people they used to look over their shoulders for. Ahsoka considered the rightness of that. Tell them, she said. Tell them the wolves bite. Tell them they won't see the teeth until too late. Tell them the corridor knows their names before they introduce themselves. If they are good-hearted, it will make them shy. If they are bad-hearted, it will make them careful. Either is acceptable. Then? Hera nodded. The lamp painted her face in soft geometry. And when someone comes who isn't good-hearted or bad-hearted, but simply wrong-hearted, we teach them to be patient with their own hunger, Ahsoka said. We teach them to be braver than curiosity. And if they prove that their courage is cruelty in disguise, we take their tools away until they remember what hands are for. Then, they ate apricots, their fingers sticky, and spoke of small things that mattered. The price of fuel, the temperament of pilots newly freed from orders, the way grief changes its shoes over the years and walks differently. Less desperate, more durable. Before dawn, Hera took her leave, touching the ring of stones with a pilot's superstitious respect. I'll bring you a kettle that doesn't burn the tea, she said. and a chair that knows how to hold you without making you feel you've been caught. Her smile was the old smile that had seen miracles and failures at the same distance. When the light came up, it did so through a lid of cloud with a pale crack along the eastern seam. The air smelled of rain that had not yet committed. Ahsoka moved through the basin and felt the temple behind her, the way a student feels the presence of a mentor who has learned when not to speak. She thought of Sabine's silhouette and of the child drawing triangles into kites. She thought of the lamp's steady flame and the list of names in the tin box, and the way the wolves' heads lift when certain questions enter the field. She stood very still, and in her stillness she made a promise that had no words, and therefore could not be broken by any missaying, that she would be the kind of threshold living beings deserved, the kind that could be trusted to keep a door closed as an act of love, and to open it with ceremony when the right feet had learned the right step. By noon the New Republic scout ship came. It circled, prudent, and the woman in the second seat peered down through a scope at the basin, and the ring of stones and the person standing at their center, and she did not feel hunger this time. She felt instead something like the recognition one has when one's own mother's voice sings from another room. The pilot looked at her sidelong and said, "Well?" with tired amusement, and the scientist said, "Let's go learn some other truths first," and the ship arrowed away, grateful to have made a decision without anyone needing to argue. The afternoon laid itself down and rose again. Shadows lengthened into their grown-up shapes. The Lothcat brought Ahsoka a beetle with a self-satisfied strut and deposited it where her foot would have crushed it, had she not learned long ago to look down when gratitude arrives. She moved the beetle to safety and thanked the cat for its generosity. Beyond the rise, voices came, laughter with the roundness of people who were not trying to prove anything, just tailing their own jokes to the place where laughter lives. She sat on the bench facing the horizon and let the sound cross the grass like a ribbon. In the corridor, arcs brightened and dimmed with the temper of distant moments. A door she could have stepped into forever ago, if she had let the ache of love be her only measure of wisdom, remained closed. Another door, one that led to a classroom where a child would soon hold up a drawing of a bench facing the horizon, stood open just a little, not to tempt, but to invite growth. Somewhere, in a space the temple kept for kindness, a voice that might have been Qui-Gon's tone without claiming the name hummed once, like the approval of an elder who knows a student has become a colleague. The sound turned the air more transparent for a breath, and then the breath passed, and the air contained itself again with uncomplaining grace. The wind picked up. Ahsoka drew her cloak closer and let her eyes trace the long line where the sky rested in the bowl of the world. "I will be here," she said again, "to the wolves, to the child, to Hera, to Ezra wherever and whenever he was, to the temple that had tolerated the arrogance and the love of generations." The words did not leave her mouth as sound. They went down into the soil as instruction, the way irrigation goes underground to teach roots to seek depth. The grass answered by moving as a body. The first drop of rain found her cheek and evaporated. The second drop did not evaporate. Then the rain arrived properly, generous and complicated, and she stood until she was soaked, and then sat until the damp became not a problem, but a state of participation. When night fell, it brought the kind of darkness that is not an absence, but a fullness, a velvety argument for rest. The lamp performed its modest duty. The dome breathed like a sleeping animal. Ahsoka lay on her side and felt the geography of her ribs and the length of her spine, the way one studies a map before a long walk. Tomorrow's watch would likely bring a man with a forged letterhead, and a woman with a recorder, and a child with a question that was really another question. It would bring also more names for the tin box, and a repair for a strap and new flowers in the lichen, and possibly a rumor that a shipment of parts had gone missing along the South Road. She let these things float away from the harbor of her mind like small boats, knowing that when the morning bell, whatever it would be, bird or train or wolf, rang, the boat she needed would return. Somewhere beyond sleep, and before dawn, the corridor hummed its polite vigilance, and the temple turned slightly on whatever axis the Force had given it, so that its corridors aligned invisibly with the corridors inside the living beings who had chosen to love it. In that alignment, without spectacle, a guardian slept, and a world remembered that the right doors, watched properly, make not prisons but promises.